like we have a few different groups here out on the road, judging by the pictures we're now seeing from above. We have the peloton at the bottom picking up a group of riders just in front, and then that other group that is actually up ahead on the road. So it's not just a 1 9-man breakaway and then the main field. Judging by these live pictures, it looks like a couple of different groups are ahead of the peloton right now with just under 50 kilometers left to go on the stage.
Yeah, so a lot happening all of a sudden. You see two more guys right now going across from the Astana-led peloton to the group right in front. And in moments like this, it's relatively easy for Vincenzo Nibali and his Astana teammates to watch guys as they go across. This is Barguil, the stage winner from a couple of days ago, I do believe, from a breakaway, the very young 21-year-old on the Argos team. But they can keep a really close eye as guys trickle off the front in a situation like this. So they know who's up the road, and they know if they have to worry about it or not. Barguil also has Cardoso with them, the khao Rual rider, and they have now bridged across to that group.
And Barguil, one of 8 first-time Grand Tour stage winners in this year's Vuelta. Which may sound like a lot, but it's really not a surprise because every year the Vuelta is an opportunity for some younger riders and riders who don't always get a shot in a Grand Tour to make their mark. And now we are back up with our leaders. Number 198 there in the dark with the blue trim. That is Rigoberto Urán, the Colombian for Team Sky. And Chris Anker Sorensen for Saxo Tinkoff in the blue, yellow, and black, riding in the middle of that group. As I mentioned before, the highest placed rider among the leaders in the general classification, but still over 20 minutes down. And going over the top of the Category 2 clock.
So a lot of possibilities here today. Urán, a very good man in the mountains. You have to think that he may have a shot at a stage win if that breakaway group can stay away from the field.
The actual summit at 46.8 kilometers remaining in the stage, and then they'll drop down, hit an intermediate sprint just over 30K from the finish, and then that final climb, the Formigal, is just over 15 kilometers in length going up to the summit finish of the stage. So just about the last 16K or so will be uphill here today. And a 44-second gap over the top of the second of the 3 clocks.
And the peloton right behind that other group, just over a dozen seconds or so separating them. So that second group struggling to get a little bit of an advantage over the peloton, and we'll see how the descent treats them. But the other guys have a little bit of an advantage, but you know, if it's under a minute at this point, it's going to be tough.
And these are the numbers that articulate the gaps and what the riders are facing. So no big time margins right now with 1 climb left to go. The Category 3, the Cat 2, and now just the Cat 1 left to go at the finish. Still everyone just going over the top of the Category 2. Now 1 climb left to go. Just about 16 kilometers in length. The Category 1 at the finish here on stage number 16. Second rest day coming up tomorrow.
finish, number 14. That particular day was brutally cold. It was really long, and they were also descending in those cold temperatures in the rain, and it just freezes you on the bike. Greg Will here really putting the pressure on that chasing group that's trying to make it up to the lead group of 9. He's already tasted victory in this Vuelta, and I think it was pretty sweet for him. He wants a little bit more.
As I pointed out, one of 8 first-time Grand Tour stage winners that we have had in the Vuelta so far this year. Now, when you see riders pull out of a race like this, it's always interesting because when you look at other sports, athletes don't always have those options. If a football player wants to quit a game in the second quarter, his coach is going to say, no, you get back in there and you play. Same with basketball, hockey, baseball. But in cycling, it seems like the athletes themselves have more control and more power over the situation. Why is that?
That's a tough one to answer why that is, but I guess it's really because the rider knows about how bad their body feels and how much they're suffering. And I think with a coach in a typical team sport, they can see the guy out there and they can see that he's floundering. They can see that he's not making his passes, he's not hitting his shots, he's not making it happen. But in a bike race, if you're just empty, you're empty. Now, there are some exceptions to those particular moments, and there used to be a race before the wall came down in the Eastern Bloc. It went through East Germany, Poland, and Czechoslovakia called the Peace Race, and it's come back, but it's not as big a race on the calendar anymore. And a couple of years before I raced that race, Steve, one of the Russian guys was in the gutter in a crosswind and ran into one of these guardrails and broke, it was his foot or his lower leg or something. His coaches, because they weren't sure, put him back on his bike and said, you're only 10K from the finish line. You got to finish because we need you tomorrow, and we want to make sure before we let you quit today that you're not able to. So he rode 6 miles basically with a broken bone in his lower leg. And
what a shock the Russians would take a hardline stance like that.
Well, and the thing is, Steve, that was the race before the wall came down. Those guys weren't racing in the rest of Europe, so that was their Tour de France, and it meant everything to that Russian coach, and the rider had to suffer through it. And they said, oh yeah, look at that, you got a broken leg, I guess you don't have to ride tomorrow.
Just under 40 kilometers now left to go on stage 16 today. And if you have questions for Gogo, you can tweet them here throughout the Vuelta telecast. And the most recent one coming in wants to know, Paul that is, how long do most professionals try to keep in the big rig when climbing?
Well, Paul, that's pretty easy. Just long enough to stay with Steve Schlanger, and he's putting the hammer down on one of those big climbs.
I'm just drilling it, you mean? Yeah.
When you're putting everybody in the hurt locker. But in all reality, what I think is the most efficient for most guys at the professional level that have a lot of efficiency and higher leg speeds is to be in the easiest gear you can be in while maintaining contact with the guys that matter. So when I was racing, and still when I go out and ride with a lot of guys, if I'm on a big mountain, I want to be spinning up the climb, and if Schlanger's up there on the front just drilling it, well, if I can be spinning an easier gear, I'll get out of my big chain ring. But if I need to stay in that bigger gear to stay with them, then I will. And that tends to be my approach to climbs, and that's what I tell young riders when they're getting into the sport of bike racing.
Because you know, I'm in the big rig going over Alpe d'Huez, Mont Ventoux. I am not backing down.
Yeah, that's pretty much the way you roll, Schlanger.
All right, so for more Twitter questions, you can do it at BGGogo, hashtag La Vuelta, in this final week of the Vuelta a España. Everyone on the descent of the Category 2 climb, headed towards the final climb
pressure out of their yard and into the bunch, and it can cause big crashes.
Now riders still off the front, in pursuit, giving chase. A lot of activity off the front of the peloton with the two groups, and especially the breakaway of 9 riders that's been at the front. But everybody wants to make it to the front, catch the riders who are at the very head of the stage right now, and put themselves in position to go for a stage win as these riders hit that intermediate sprint point I just mentioned a moment ago.
Steve, there are a lot of possibilities. Gusev, the Katusha rider, Sorensen, and the other Sorensen on the Saxo team. That's Nicky Sorensen going across. Today is one of those days where a lot of guys really thought there was a chance if they made the break that they would stay away, because the finishing climb, though it's long, is not super steep, and maybe the general classification guys will just be eyeing each other and not ramp it up fast enough to catch the breakaway.
Well, it's a very interesting dynamic right now because you have a lot of riders here in this move that is up the road. They just don't have a lot of time, and when you have a long climb at the finish, you're going to have that natural process of attrition that's going to bring a lot of these riders back and carry a lot of the general classification riders forward. So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. Are some of these riders going to launch an attack and maybe 3 or 4 go up the road together? And there's just a lot of possibilities now for the way the remainder of the stage could unfold.
Yeah, and that group looks like it's about 20 guys at this point. So it is definitely one of those days where you roll the dice and just see how it plays out at the end of the day.
Back here at the front of the general classification group, going through the intermediate sprint, 122 down, led by Astana.
So the lead group has picked up a little bit of time. They were down to only 37 seconds advantage over the peloton not long ago. If that keeps up for very long, if Astana is comfortable, the team in the blue, the team of the overall leader, Vincenzo Nibali, if they are happy with that break, it may succeed.
Some riders scattered about right now in that peloton as they look up the long road ahead to see another big group now at the front of the stage. Margin now swelling to our leaders, going up close to 3 minutes with 26.5 kilometers remaining.
Amassed around him, and then it's all the Astana guys on the front. They are certainly content to let that breakaway go today.
Thinking about how Astana has all the riders still in this race, and of course Vincenzo Nibali is leading the overall race for Astana. Nibali was part of the Liquigas Cannondale team that had that incredible streak of so many Grand Tours in a row where they wouldn't lose a single rider. Every single guy was finishing every single Grand Tour.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible as we see so much attrition in these Grand Tours. And it makes sense. I mean, you got 3 weeks of racing over 23 calendar days, so there's always 2 rest days thrown in there. But guys, inevitably, they end up sick, they crash out, or they just get so depleted they can't go any further, and they have to drop out of the race. And so it's not unheard of to see almost every team finish some riders down in every Grand Tour.
So Astana with most of their riders at the front of the field right now with 25.5 kilometers left to go. So just inside of 10K away from the start of the final climb.
Talked about him already, winning stage 13 from a breakaway previously.
And late to the last 2 days, we have had a first-time Grand Tour stage winner who was out front by himself for a long time, gaining a lot of time over anybody chasing from behind. Rato 2 days ago, Ginier yesterday, had several minutes on everybody else, and coming from a breakaway but riding solo for the last hour or so of the race. But today, a big group, and it doesn't look like we're going to get that solo rider getting that substantial amount of time here today the way we saw over the weekend.
This one certainly could come down to seconds at the finish line. And that group was kind of splitting up. It's kind of coming back together. Some guys along for the ride, just sitting on save some energy now, then they'll be good later on, but there could be a split in front of them in the group, and then they may miss that split as one of the BMC men, it looks like, heading out of the front of that breakaway group.
Fabian Cancellara, number 181 at the back of the peloton. One of the top support riders for Chris Moore in the hills, and also won the time trial on stage 11 in dominating fashion.
Got to look for Cancellara at the Worlds as well to be a hugely marked man. I think in the road race, he's going to be so marked it may ruin his chances, but he may be on some of the best road form of his career right now.
Euskaltel at the front of the field. Sammy Sanchez is their highest placed general classification rider. Yesterday moving up into the top 10. Currently sitting 9th at 7:46 behind Nibali. Sanchez looks like second wheel there from the front, so perhaps just trying to protect his spot, maybe even move up further in the general classification.
And they're one of those teams that has all 9 members remaining. The other one is Astana. And interestingly, they're the top 2 teams in the team general classification, which is the first 3 guys that cross your line, the finish line every day. Astana leads that by 3:53 over Euskaltel. I still... It's a little curious to me to see all the Euskaltel guys on the front right now. They're not going to bring back the breakaway. And I'm wondering if there's a Team GC play in. Maybe Movistar has a bunch of guys in this break, and they're the 3rd place team on Team GC, and maybe that's what they're riding for right now, is to try and keep that gap small.
Yeah, you never know. There's so many possibilities. It could be the Team GC. It could be just for Sanchez. It could be other guys just trying to move around in the general classification or race for a separate competition. You always look at Whites and King of the Mountains, the combination jersey. There's so many other subcategories beyond the overall general classification that teams have their eyes on, and on any given day they could be riding for that as opposed to just the overall. With a margin of just over 3 minutes and just about to start that last climb. Officially, it begins at 15.8 kilometers remaining on the stage. So if you do want to attack, that is a likely point late in the climb. With 15 kilometers left to go now, Barguil pulls off the front. This is a run for Team Sky now at the head of affairs.
Charuka there for Caja Rual, and that is
Jose Harada there for Movistar as well.
So there is at least one Movistar man up the road. No Euskaltel men up the road right now. Thinking about that Team GC issue potentially.
Now we have a rider accelerating here. He's going to go to the front and stretch things out a little for the group.
Yeah, trying to make it up there. Dominique Nares in this front group is the BMC man in the red and black.
Looks like there's a good chance of this group coming back together the way things are developing here.
So that's Harada in the blue for Movistar, Barguil in the white for Argos. And we do have an Euskaltel rider up there as well. So now it makes absolutely no sense to me why the Euskaltel men are on the front of the peloton.
Still be the general classification.
I guess it's got to be
in some fashion for Sammy Sanchez.
Yeah, they just got to be thinking maybe he can pop off late in the race today and pick up a handful of seconds and have an impact on the general classification. You talked about Sanchez coming in 7:46 down in 9th place, but it's Leopold Koenig in 8th at 6:18. That's almost a minute and a half in front of him in the GC. But you know, you pick up a little time here, a little there, and maybe by the end of this week, he moves up into the top 5. Maybe that's what he's got his designs on.
Is still thinking about the team classification. Probably not a bad goal for them since they are disbanding in their current form at the end of the year. They have the Formula One driver, Fernando Alonso, coming in to take so what they'll be referred to as going forward. But Euskaltel, the way we have known them over the years, is now going to be altered somewhat. So maybe this would be a good way to go out in their final Grand Tour to win the team competition. As you see the critical numbers here on the final clock. So no one really getting away from the big group at the front. We've seen some accelerations, but nothing that's looked close to becoming permanent. 2K into the climb, back at the front of the field. Euskaltel, the orange and black, still leading the way. We are just under 14 kilometers left to go on stage 16 of the Vuelta a España, presented by Earbuds here on Universal Sports. A big leading group has just under 3 minutes on the main field on one of the shorter stages in this year's race. This is the final of 3 consecutive stages in the Pyrenees in northern Spain. Steve Schlager with Todd Gugolski. Gorgeous day, sunny and warm after cold and rainy weather this weekend. Forced a lot of riders to drop out. Maybe rethinking things now, judging by the scenery they are enjoying today on stage 16, just ahead of the race's second rest day coming up tomorrow. We had a few different groups on the road earlier in the race as the breakaway tried to get settled. Took a long time today, and finally 2 groups came together, formed a large group at the front. And now this is the head of the peloton, led by Euskaltel in the orange and black, just going inside of the 15K to go banner on the stage.
Up here in that large breakaway group is Juan Manuel Garate, the Spaniard on the Belkin squad, who's trying to mix things up a little bit. The Frenchman in the white who just swung off of the chase, Barguil, who won stage 13 from a breakaway earlier in this race. But you can see how many guys are back there trying to claw their way back up to the wheel of the few men in front of them.
Now the Belkin team is one of the 4 that I mentioned earlier that has lost 5 riders throughout this race. They lost Theo Boss, Graham Brown, Steph Clement, Luis Leon Sanchez, and Laurent Tandam along the way. So they've lost over half the riders they started with. So trying to salvage something in one. Manuel Garate now at the front of the stage with just about a dozen kilometers left to go uphill to the finish.
And Steve, of course, this large group of riders has nobody who's a threat in the general classification battle of this Vuelta. So they are content to fight it out for the stage win, as Mikel Charel, the 3rd man up here, and he is number 15 on the left, just getting back on the wheel of Garate. This breakaway group, with no threat from the GC, has a very good chance of succeeding for the stage win.
Barguil, Charel, and Garate. Garate at the front in the green and dark colors for Belkin. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't Juan Manuel Garate the rider who on Saturday during the cold and rain got into the team car and warmed up for a little while before continuing in the race?
I actually think it was him, as he just put the heater on full blast and said, look, I have 2 options. I can lose 10 minutes sitting in the car, or I can quit the race. Well, let me think about that for about 10 minutes. Okay, I guess I'll get back on my bike.
So during the way he's riding today, maybe that little lunch break in the team car to warm up was a smart move. Inside of 11K now to the finish of stage 16.
That's what's so critical about these bike racers, is that they never give up, because, yeah, there are only a few guys in the hunt for the general classification, but anybody could pick up a stage win from a breakaway on a day like today. And so if you feel horrible one day, you just can't drop out, and you may still get another chance.
And not as shocking as you may think, because considering what Belkin had been through, again, losing 5 riders already, so they weren't going to do much in the race. There was nobody left for the general classification, nobody left for the sprints. So maybe just winning a stage in the final week was the only goal they had left. So Garate says, hey, I can lose time in the general classification, no big deal. I'll take care of my body now and be fresh later.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the name of the game. You gotta get whatever you can get out of these races, and you just fight to the next day, and you say, let's see if I can get say, tasked with making the breakaway, and they all follow the attacks, and they all go on the attack, and eventually one of those moves sticks. And if you got your guy in there, well, that's the first part of your job accomplished.
10 kilometers left to go. Euskaltel at the front of the main field. They have it lined up and are forcing the pace.
Yeah, you can see Chris Horner. Well, we just lost him there, but he's about 9-10 guys back, and he's just right behind that strung-out single file pace being led by Euskaltel.
Back to the large leading group at the front.
So the youthful exuberance of Lauren Barguil after winning a stage from a breakaway back a few days ago, stage number 13. I wonder if he's going to do too much work in that breakaway group. He looks like he has great legs, but he may blow himself up in the process of trying to get away from everybody else and thin it down.
And the rider from Cofidis coming back from the breakaway. Well, the way that Euskaltel has been riding now for the last several kilometers, at first it looked like maybe it was for the team competition or maybe just a GC placing for somebody like Sammy Sanchez. But the way they've been riding, you almost have to think that they're trying to bring everything back so they can get a stage win.
It does seem that way to me, as they're going huge right now. So 2:39 at the 11K to go banner. So that's just under 7 miles from the finish of the bike race.
It's still a big group to try and bring back here.
Well, the youthful exuberance continues, and this time with nobody on his wheel, this is what he needs. Sitting on the front, pulling the other guys that don't want to work with him is probably not going to net him a stage win, but this type of a move, this guy can go uphill.
Barguil making his move right here. Turned around, said, you know what? This is not a good deal. All you guys sitting on my wheel, so I'll see you later. Catch me if you can.
Yeah, and if they look around at each other in that giant group and everybody says, no, I'm not going to chase, you chase. No, I'm not going to chase, you chase. Well, the man who won the Tour de l'Avenir last year, he also won the Mountains and the Points classification, and that's the race for the young guys, also known as the race of the future. He could pick up his second stage win in this year's Vuelta at only 21 years of age.
Among that large leading group, he was riding at the front longer than anybody else. It wasn't one of those big groups we typically see where everybody takes even pulls at the front. They all work in concert with one another. Barguil was left to do so much of that pacemaking, so this is a smart move to take off and see what he can do on his own. All right, so they went through that flat and downhill section early in the climb, now starting to go steadily uphill.
What's incredible about this guy is he's a first-year professional, Steve. To get the win in stage 13, he was ecstatic. He was overcome with joy. Now he's got that confidence from that, and he's gone on the attack again from that breakaway group. And now he can start to try and think about it and think, I've already done this once. Can I do this again? He will be absolutely beside himself if he can win a second stage.
Has put a man back on the front ahead of Euskaltel. They are 2:46 behind Barguil at this point. Climb back here in the general classification with the rest day on tap tomorrow. Does it make it worthwhile to even try something today, or do you just save it for the big climbs coming up later this week?
Well, have a look at the speed of the peloton, and it is actually on right now in the peloton. The peloton is blowing apart, so definitely if you have a shot, go for it. Nibali sitting third wheel in the red jersey, overall leader. Valverde fourth wheel in the green as the points leader. Right behind Valverde in the white jersey, Chris Horner out of the saddle right now. They all have to keep looking at each other, because if you get an opportunity, man, you have to take it.
So Katusha at the front of this group too. Their goal now is to try to move Joaquim Rodriguez onto the podium. He's fourth in the overall standings at 2:57 behind Nibali, but he's chasing Alejandro Valverde, who is third on the GC at 1:42 back.
Well, this is white hot. I mean, these guys are absolutely storming, and it looks like Moreno now just pulls off. Valverde. Here he goes.
Alejandro Valverde launching the move. Nibali looks at Horner.
Horner needs to sit on Nibali. Horner has to not do any work here. He has to make Nibali do the work. director would have told him to sit up at that point, because the director can't feel his legs, right?
And it's not like he's going to win the stage. They're not going to catch Barguil from at this point.
Now remember, everybody has the rest day to look forward to tomorrow, so it's a good day to go for shots, and that looks like Nicholas Roach taking another shot just like yesterday.
Roach trying to move up into the top 5, currently 6th on the general classification, 349 down, but he's just 6 seconds from the top 5 spot.
And they immediately neutralized him with Katusha, and it looks like Rodriguez on the second wheel. Now Rodriguez opens it up.
Burrito was attacking yesterday, didn't go anywhere. Now Chris Horner just ahead of Nibali, putting in a little bit of an acceleration, and he's got a small gap on Nibali.
Well, Rodriguez loves to accelerate in a very punchy fashion. Horner, a little separation, and there's no Nibali with Horner. Horner needs to just throttle him.
But he's looking around. He's looking around at 2K.
Now he's going. Now Horner's starting to pick it up, but it's Nibali closing it down in the red jersey.
Yeah, here comes Vincenzo Nibali now, working his way back to Chris Horner with Valverde on Nibali's wheel. As we swing back to the very front of the race, haven't seen this guy in the last
He
several
just blew
minutes.
up, and Barguil just blew up, but Horner now continuing to keep it going here.
He's still got the gap on Nibali. There's Aran. Rigoberto Aran passing Warren Barguil as they hit the 1K to go mark.
Aran could salvage something for the Sky team here. Aran with a lot more experience than Barguil in the professional ranks. Realize that Barguil is a first-year pro.
At a thoroughbred pace, it seems like, in the final half mile of the race. Side by side. And then behind them, Burrito Rodriguez with his teammate, Vladimir Gusev. So Rodriguez sitting right behind Gusev, and they have a gap on the other general classification riders led by Horner here. Where's Nibali?
Oh, this is huge right now as Horner has that gap. He needs 50 seconds to move back into the overall lead. Not much time to do it today, but he might be getting some of it.
So much for a nondescript day before a rest day. This is Nibali losing time to Horner, sitting behind Valverde.
And Thibaut Pinot there, and then it's Valverde. Then it's now in the orange is Sammy Sanchez. Nibali in.
There goes Valverde. Valverde launches a move.
You gotta go when you have the race leader in trouble.
It looks like Burrito Rodriguez here. Now it looks like the time bonuses will be eaten up ahead of these riders on the road. Chris Horner in the middle of the screen in the white, behind Rodriguez, who was at the bottom of the screen. This is the race leader, Vincenzo Nibali. He is losing time. These are our 2 leaders on the stage. Aran in the dark colors, Barguil in the white, coming up to the finish, waiting to see who's going to get the stage win between these 2.
And Barguil refusing to pull. He says, no, you're in the front. And here comes Nares right on the wheel with Husarski. Husarski's got a good finish as well. Don't count him out.
Aran looks over his shoulder just the way he did in the Olympic road race in London last year. It cost him a gold medal. Now he's trying to preserve a stage win here at the Vuelta. Looks like it could be a 4-man race for the victory today with 200 meters to go.
And Aran starting to ramp it up, and here comes Husarski. Beware, gentlemen.
Aran not in a position he wants. Barguil right behind him, then Husarski. Nares losing the gap. He can't hold on. Now Aran sprinting for the stage win. Just ahead of Barguil. Is he going to hold on? Barguil came up, and I think Barguil pulls off his second stage win just ahead of Aran.
Barguil at only 21 years of age, showing the poise of a seasoned veteran, not taking a pull and getting the win. But here's Horner right back here.
He is a little ways behind this man, Joaquim Rodriguez. Again, Joaquim Rodriguez looking to move up into the top 3, currently 4th in the general classification.
This is a big battle, and look at Nibali, all kinds of guys up the road from the race leader.
That's Leopold Koenig coming up behind him. Now, other riders crossing over here, part of the Thibaut Pinot in the blue.
So it is true that Valverde made it across from the Nibali group up to the Horner-led group. And now he's just sitting on the wheel, and he's probably going to jump Chris, but Chris needs to bury the throttle to get back as much time as he possibly can on Vincenzo Nibali.
All right, here's Nibali at 300 meters to go with Igor Anton in the orange and black for Euskaltel. Let's see where the Horner-Valverde group is. Here's Rodriguez coming across the finish line. There's Valverde, who pulled ahead of Pinot and Horner. Chris Horner crosses the line. At 1:46 behind the stage winner. Now let's see where Nibali comes across. He's got 100 meters left to the line.
It's a nice little chunk that he picked up, no doubt.
Already 15 seconds that Horner has taken back. Over 20 seconds, Horner has pulled back on Nibali. 22 seconds officially. Horner takes back on the race leader Vincenzo Nibali with the summit finish on stage 16 at the Vuelta. We come back to our coverage of stage 16 at the Vuelta a España. And here is the new general classification. Chris Horner now within half a minute of Vincenzo Nibali at the top of the standings. Also some movement behind them with Alejandro Valverde and Joaquin Rodriguez on the move there late in the stage. And Rodriguez actually picks up a few seconds on Valverde as they race for that final podium spot. Valverde, the first to accelerate from the group of GC riders on the last climb.
This really got things ramped up as Valverde sat up, but then he went again, and all the men started to crumble up the road. Also was Joaquin Rodriguez, who had attacked after Valverde went, and it was when Chris Horner went after him that gap really opened up.
So this is where Nibali for a moment looked like he was going to bring it back on Horner, but then Horner opened up a larger margin.
Horner just stayed out of the saddle and just kept drilling it as Rodriguez came across. Then Valverde, who had gotten up to the Chris Horner group and jumped him at the end, but the clock stopped there for Horner, and it was a long time before Nibali got to the finish line.
It would be 22 seconds overall between Horner and Nibali at the finish today, reducing his deficit from 50 seconds to 28. Well, here we go. The final 5 days of the season's final Grand Tour, and here is where we stand. Vincenzo Nibali is still the leader right now. Just under half a minute is his margin over the American Chris Horner at 28 seconds. So much developed a couple of days ago. Let's go to GoGo Cycle Center, outfitted by 189 kilometers to Burgos with 2 Category 3 climbs there in the second half of the race.
And it is about 117 miles today. There's that little bump inside the final 10K, but when you only have a two-man break, it certainly looks like a day for the sprinters.
And that two-man break is on the left-hand side of the screen, now full screen, as we pick up the live action with just under 80 kilometers left to go. They have a lead of 4 minutes, which is just under half of their largest margin, which was over 8 minutes earlier in the stage. The Aussie Adam Hansen is the rider right here for Lotto Belisol, and Javier Aramendia in the green and white just behind him is the Spaniard for the Caja Rural team. Two-man breakaway that the general classification riders were content to let go. They are well down in the general classification. Hansen here, almost 2 hours back of our leader, Vincenzo Nibali.
Very tough for two guys. Javier Aramendia, you're seeing 3 hours, 16 minutes down on the general classification, but he's featured in multiple breaks. But on a day like this that everybody thinks the sprinters really want to take advantage of an opportunity, it's so hard if you only have a two-man break for them to stay away. But it's always time to eat.
A little pizza pocket or something that he shoves in the mouth as we take you through what is at stake here in this stage number 17. You have the 2 Category 3 climbs, and you have the notion of a sprint stage versus a breakaway, potentially stealing the opportunity for
finishes in the race, and he continues to, well, let's just say hold out hopes. If you're a sprinter, you have to believe in your ability, and of course his team has to believe in that ability as well.
The most recent inquiry coming from Sandra, asking Gogo if the ride into Madrid on the final day is like the tour into Paris on the Champs-Élysées. Is it just ceremony for the general classification? I could answer that.
Would you want to answer it?
I would say absolutely, it's the same thing.
I'm going to take a slightly different take, and you can see right now, I just want to point out this crosswind has made a little bit of a difference here over the top of that climb, but it's somewhat similar to the Tour, but I think they get down to racing a little bit earlier in the Vuelta than they do in the Tour, whereas the Tour is ceremonial for a greater part of the stage. But yes, it's a flat day, so the guys know that they can't make any general classification differences, but they have the next 3 days with summit finishes to get all the business done.
Well, something to consider in this year's Vuelta is the fact that the top two, Nibali and Horner, are separated by under half a minute. So if that gap gets even closer, we may actually see some racing on the final day. It typically doesn't happen just because the time gaps are significant enough that guys just use it as that coronation type of a stage, and it's essentially a parade. But if the time gaps are small, you do see some racing.
Yeah, and there's no reason that you wouldn't. There are also two intermediate sprints on the final day, Steve, and they have a few seconds attached to each one of those. So if it's within an intermediate sprint or two, then you're really going to see some action. But we're seeing some action here right now because of the crosswind. And this is what the general classification men needed to be worried about. You saw the green jersey of Valverde there, but you need to keep a close eye out and see if Horner and Nibali are also in that front split.
And to ask Gogo a question throughout the Vuelta a España, just go to Twitter. It's @VGGogo, #LaVuelta. So Lapre at the front, Oregon Green Edge there, and then Movistar. These groups now that were split on the road by a few seconds, it looks like are coming back together. But this was the most dangerous aspect of this stage. The winds coming from various directions. Headwind, crosswind, tailwind should be coming up later on, but something you always have to keep a watchful eye for. And now on the left-hand side of the road, almost single file here at the back because of those winds. Looks like a sprinter stage on paper, but you have a couple of climbs, you have some undulations late, you have wind, you never know what might happen, and we've seen more than one textbook sprinter stage develop into something entirely different throughout this race.
And that was Simmons, who just got brought back, who was off the front and was third over the last mountain, but we're still up to our two men off the front. So now that means the next climb of the day, the guy who's third across can get some points, and we may see another battle between Rato and Ade for that final point.
Barguil, the young Frenchman of the Argos team, who won stage number 17 in dramatic fashion, outsprinting Rigoberto Urán at the very end. He's won 2 stages in this Vuelta, his first 2 Grand Tour stage victories, and the young Frenchman, believe it or not, has as many wins as Spain does in their home Grand Tour. The only Spanish victories are Daniel Moreno's 2 stage wins. That's incredible.
It really is incredible. I mean, sometimes you can never predict what's going to happen in a bike race, and some days, well, they're somewhat predictable, but these Grand Tours, the way these tea leaves, as you like to refer to them, get played out, it can be really challenging to figure out how it's going to happen.
Yeah, the wind's still blowing, not all that briskly at the moment for our 2 leaders on this Category 3 climb, as the gap for the first time since we've seen them has come down under 3 minutes. And just about 2.5 kilometers left to go uphill. Now, so many elements in play for the general classification. The experience of Nibali finishing off a Grand Tour, having had to fight for it all the way to the end. Chris Horner, just the experience of being a veteran bike racer, having the freshness of not forcing a peak earlier in the season the way Nibali did. And Horner just having that fitness right now in the big mountains that nobody else seems to have. There's other guys who are riding pretty well, but nobody is climbing as well as Chris Horner. So you have a lot of these components that are going to all be huge factors in the final 5 days of racing here. And it's just basically all going to come down to who has it when it matters most in the upper reaches of the decisive climbs. And we should see that tomorrow and on Saturday. All right, 2 leaders leading by just under 3 minutes, coming up towards the top of the Category 3 climb. Well, the 11th day overall for Vincenzo Nibali in the red jersey as the leader of the Vuelta. Now on stage number 17, trying to recover from the exertions of those 3 consecutive summit finishes in the Pyrenees, coming off the rest day yesterday where he slept in till almost noon, and now trying to recover for 2 more big mountain days coming up tomorrow and on Saturday, stage number 20. As they hit the 4-hour mark today on stage 17, 2-man breakaway, 2-minute lead, 38.5 kilometers left to go. But boy, what a battle it's been between Nibali and Horner. Each has worn the red jersey twice, lost it, gotten it back. You don't often see an overall race lead at a Grand Tour like that, going back and forth that much, especially early in a race. But Nibali has surrendered it, gotten it back, and now he's enjoyed the longest consecutive spell that he's had the entire race, and he's hoping to hang on all the way to Madrid.
It certainly has been a big battle, Steve, and you know, one of the things that you often don't see is you don't see the guy who's in the overall lead having not won a stage, and that's the case with Nibali right now. His Astana team won the opening team time trial by a handful of seconds over Radio Shack and Chris Horner's team, but since then Horner's taken a couple of stage wins, and each time it's put him in the jersey, but then he's gone on to lose it the very next day, whereas Nibali has just been consistently at the top of the standings on each individual stage, and that's been the key to being in the jersey at this point.
Lampre, the team in the pink and blue, riding at the front of the main field here to keep the breakaway in check. There's the king of the mountains, leader Nicolas Ede, now at the back of the field after getting the 3rd slot in terms of points available over the final categorized summit today. But Lampre at the front of this group, riding for sprinter Max Riqueze here today. And that second climb, Hansen, Armandia, and Ede were the first 3 over, the only 3 getting any points. The way it stands right now in the general classification, it's all coming down to what happened on the time trial on stage number 11. Chris Horner lost 1.5 minutes to Nibali there. Had he lost just about a minute, maybe a little less, he'd be in the red jersey right now.
There's no doubt, and it's one of those weird things that it's an intangible to calculate. When I was talking with Chris before the time trial, he told me, well, you know, he didn't really care if he lost the jersey as long as he was close, that he could get it back in the mountains because he was feeling so good. But when he came out of that time trial 50 seconds down, that was on the sort of the far end of where he thought he was going to be. He thought he would probably be 30 seconds to 60 seconds off the lead. And when I spoke with his director after that, he said, well, we wish that Chris had been 15 seconds out of the jersey, not 50. So, you know, you have to take what you can get there, and certainly they haven't had to defend, which keeps the guys fresher, but it's a lot of time to make up.
We've discussed throughout this race how him being fresh and not having raced that much because the knee injury might help him long term, but that's also potentially where his biggest liability comes, not having the miles under his belt on the TT bike.
Yeah, he hadn't been on his time trial bike at all, and that was a question I made sure to ask him, and he just said, look, man, you know, I spent the whole summer going to different specialists trying to figure out what was wrong with my knee and how to get over it, and he couldn't ride his bike. So when he finally was able to get back on his bike, he did, you know, and I'm summarizing here, 2 weeks riding around my neighborhood, just getting getting used to riding again. 2 weeks of endurance riding and one really long, hard week before the Tour of Utah. Then he took a few days off, raced Utah, won a stage, got second overall, and then he continued with a few hard days after taking 1 day off after Utah, went to Spain, took a few days off, started the race. So he felt like he would benefit more by just training on his road bike than really spending the focused time on the time trial bike. And in the end, there's no way to know, you know.
Which makes sense because your climbing comes around first, and that's been evidenced by how good Horner has been climbing at the Vuelta. But you compromise your time trialing when you're not on your TT bike as much, and in the end, that 1 day could be the difference in the red jersey for this race.
It certainly could, and no matter what happens in this race, if Chris Horner loses it, if he loses it by anything less than 50 seconds, everybody's going to say that was the deciding factor. And to a point, it's somewhat true. But if he loses the race by 28 seconds, where he is now, let's say he gets the same time as Vincenzo on every one of the next stages, you still can't guarantee